Some bookbinding projects are challenging because of their size, and this one is challenging because it is so small. These books are tiny, but they are still proper sewn books with a hardcover. I make these as little gifts, and they have become surprisingly popular in my shop, especially as back-to-school gifts. And because I add the optional thread loop, they can also be used as little Christmas tree decorations. So today I'm going to show you how I make them, and because I sometimes make 40 or 50 of these for a market, I've kept the construction simple and quick. Hi, I'm Joanna. Welcome back to my missredfox paper art channel. It's all about bookbinding and paper crafts for beginners here. For one book, I'm using 2 pieces of 1mm board for the covers, 5 by 6.5 centimeters each. 1 piece of decorative paper, also for the cover, 13 by 8.5 centimeters. This is Japanese chiogami. A strip of the same paper, 3 by 6.3 centimeters for reinforcing the spine on the inside. Cardstock for the end paper, 10.5 by 6.3 centimeters. 1 A4 sheet of dotted paper cut into 8 pieces of 10.5 by 6.3 centimeters each. Thin waxed linen thread, about 25 to 30 centimeters. And optional, some thicker linen thread, this is 1mm thick, for hanging loop, about 20 centimeters. My finished book is 5 by 6.5 centimeters when closed. I'm starting by making the covers in much the same way as I would make a normal hardcover case. Difference is that I'm not using a separate spine board. I will glue the boards onto the cover paper with a 1 centimeter gap between them, and I will have a 1 centimeter on each side for the turn-ins. I also mark the turn-ins to make this faster, to not have to eyeball everything. Clean my hands. Because there is no spine board, the decorative paper itself and this little strip of paper form the flexible spine area, and it's best to use Japanese chiogami or Nepalese locked-up papers for this because these papers are quite flexible and durable. Now I have to cut the corners here at 45 degrees. And I will eyeball this and not to use my corner jig. Then glue the turn ends. Push these little edges to the inside. Here as well. So as you can see, I have this 1 centimeter gap in the middle between the 2 boards, and now I will put a bit of glue here to add my optional hanging loop. I'm using a thicker linen thread here, about 1 millimeter, because a thin bookbinding thread would simply look and feel too delicate for hanging the book. and I would like to have about 6.5 to 7 centimeter of the loop which extends above the book, and I have them. And the two tails lie inside the spine gap. I am keeping the two tails slightly separated, as you can see, rather than placing them directly on top of each other. This distributes the tension over a little more area. Now I cover the thread with a bit of glue. And I will glue this strip of paper here in the middle. It secures the thread and acts as a reinforcement for the spine area at the same time. And it's just a bit shorter than the boards with 6.3 centimeters, and this is 6.5. I can check if this closes properly. And I will let the cover dry completely before putting the book block inside. The hanging loop is completely optional, of course. If you are making the book simply as a tiny notebook, you can leave it out, but for hanging it in a Christmas tree or attaching it to a gift, it's nice to have this, and I like that it has no visible knot. Now for the pages. I had a A4 sheet of paper which I cut into 8 equal pieces of 10.5 by 6.3 centimeters each, and I will now fold them, perhaps 2 or 4 at a time. I will fold them exactly in half. And now if I nest them in one another, I have one signature with 32 pages in total. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, 31 and 32. For the end paper, I'm using cardstock. It's the same size as these pieces of paper, so 10.5 by 6.3 centimeters. I also fold it in half, and I will place it outside this folded paper signature. The end paper is sewn together with the signature rather than being a separate folded end paper that is later attached to the book. And ideally, I would probably use a somewhat thinner end paper here, because this cardstock is thicker than the cover paper, and because this book has only one thick signature, it does contribute a little to the stiffness when opening and closing the book. But there is also practical advantage in doing it this way. For such a tiny book, it is much easier to sew the end paper together with the signature, instead of making traditional end papers where you would have to fold and glue one end paper to the first page and the cover, and the other one to the last page and the other cover. So for a quick little book that I may need to make in large quantities, for my markets for example, this simpler construction makes much more sense to me. I will mark or punch the sewing holes along the fold. They are 2 centimeters apart, with one hole exactly in the middle of the fold. And because the book is so small, I find it easier to use this simple template rather than measuring every single signature individually. Make sure everything is aligned properly. And Now I will punch all the 3 holes through the signature fold with my awl. Now for the sewing, I'm using about 25 to 30 centimeters of thin wax linen thread, and I'm using this simple 3-hole pamphlet stitch, and I start from the outside of the signature in the middle hole and finish in the same hole. This is the most complicated part of the sewing, finding the hole. So I start in the middle from the outside to the inside. I leave a tail at about, I don't know, 5 to 6 centimeters, and then sew through all the holes to the outside and again to the inside through the remaining hole. It's not large enough. Pull tight into the direction of sewing, then go out through the middle hole again, remove the needle and make a double knot. So left over right and right over left. And cut the tails. Because this is such a small book, there isn't much room for a bulky knot, so I keep it as flat as I can. And yeah, as you saw, trim the remaining thread quite close. And the nice thing about this binding is that it is very quick. There's only 1 signature and 3 sewing holes, so once you made a few, you can sew them quite quickly. Now I will put the signature under pressure before trimming it. Before I attach the book block to the covers, I will trim the signature. First, I will check the size against the cover. And as you can see, it shows a bit of the pages here, so I have to trim it. I will position the signature with the spine against something straight, so it can't move. And I take a metal ruler and a fresh blade, and I will carefully trim about 2 to 4 millimeters from the foredge. This removes the paper creep and gives me a nice clean edge that fits inside the covers. And I will check the fit again after trimming. So the book is straight, parallel to this edge, and I position my ruler against this edge too. This is something I bought, and I put a cutting mat inside, and it's quite perfect for projects like this. So something like this, fresh blade, and then start by cutting 1 layer at once. Don't try to cut through all layers. Like this, the cut is much cleaner and straighter. So take your time here. And try to keep the blade perpendicular on your surface. Now I have a clean edge here, and it fits inside the covers. And if the head or tail also needs a little adjustment because the sheets or end paper weren't perfectly aligned, then I will trim these separately. So what I do, I find it easier to turn the signature 90 degrees clockwise. So this is spine fold and this is my foredge. And then start cutting at the spine fold towards the foredge and not the other way around. Now these edges clean as well, and this looks nice. And if my edges are a bit too rough, I can sand them a bit. Because the book is so small, this final trimming makes quite a difference to the finished appearance. And once the cover is dry and the book block is pressed and trimmed, I'm ready to attach the signature. I first check again if everything fits. And now I need some scrap paper to protect the pages. And I will apply glue here on the end paper. So this one is important because I only want glue on the end paper and not on the pages. So, and try to not glue the spine fold. This is how the book opens easier after that. Place the book centered inside the cover and close the cover. And open it again and check if the end paper is centered here between the head and the tail. Close again. Now you can work a bit with your bone folder to attach it properly. I also like to push a bit with my bone folder into the fold here to be sure that it sits centered in the spine fold. And now on the other side. Close the book again, align the cover edges, open and check. It seems to be a little bit of glue here. So now this is constructed and I can dry it, and for this I will put it under a press with some paper here to protect the pages from the dampness of the glue. A little note about this particular construction while the book we made is drying. I'm using 8 folded sheets in one signature, so the book block is relatively thick for such a small book. If I used several thinner signatures, the book would probably open and close more freely, but that would also mean more sewing and a more complicated construction. And these little books are meant to be quick projects. When I'm preparing for a market, I may want to make 40 or 50 of them, so I need a construction that is reasonably fast to repeat. And this version gives me a good compromise. A proper sewn book, a hardcover, and a simple construction that I can make in batches. The thicker end paper also adds some stiffness, which is another reason the book may not lie completely flat or close as I would like, or as easy as a larger multi-signature book. But for me, that's an acceptable trade-off for this particular project. Why I make them? Well, I originally started making this because I like tiny books and the challenge to make some, but they turned out to be surprisingly versatile little gifts. At this time of the year, they work particularly well as back-to-school gifts, and they are small enough to be a little surprise, but they are still a real notebook that can actually be used. And I've also heard from some people who bought them as little books for their children's dolls. So some even put one into a tiny backpack together with a doll as a little back-to-school gift. And I think that's particularly charming. And of course, with the hanging loop, it has another life as a Christmas tree decoration. That's actually why I like making them in different versions. The same little book can be a notebook, a tiny gift, a doll accessory, or a Christmas decoration. I start making those quite early in the year when I know I want a larger quantity for my Christmas markets. And when you make everything by hand, you can't really wait until November and then decide you need 50 Christmas decorations. So this is why I start making them in August or September. So this is my tiny hardcover book. It's only 5 by 6.5 centimeters, but it still has sewn pages, end papers, a proper cover, and if you want, this little hanging loop. I like this project because it looks much more complicated than it actually is, and I think they would also make a lovely little handmade gift for someone who loves books and stationery. If you make one, you can of course adapt the size to whatever paper you have available. Just keep the basic construction in mind. One simple sewn signature, 2 boards with a flexible gap between them, and a book block glued into the finished cover. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Feel free to like and subscribe if you like this tutorial, and stay tuned for more bookbinding videos. Happy crafting!